Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Robert Baskerville. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to today's Puerto Rican Heritage Month celebration. Today's activity is part of the Decipher monthly variety show. It brings artists, journalists, authors, activists, organizers to stimulate a much needed, long overdue discussions about the fate of people of color here in the United States in relationship to the broader society of which we have had a very ambivalent part for much of our history. This event brings together a coalition of organizations, not only RISEUP, but partners like the Mount Vernon Public Library, Arts Westchester, and I'm happy to say that this particular event has garnered considerable support from our former and current elected officials, including former Mayor and City Councilman Andre Wallace, who is, he will forgive me, who is currently a candidate for mayor in the city of Mount Vernon. Support from Congressman Jamal Bowman's office, who everyone knows was just recently elected to another 2-year term. And finally, another significant source of support is from County Legislator Tyree Woodson. Yes, y'all can give everyone a round of applause. Needless to say, everyone, it's going to take a coalition of all of us to get together. And so I'd like to ask County Legislator Woodson to please come up and introduce the brainchild behind today's event. As Legislator Woodson comes up to introduce the brainchild, I'd ask everyone to please turn off your cell phones so that there's no unnecessary interruption.
And let's give Dr. Bob a round of applause for all he does on Black Westchester and also in the community daily. And I also want to recognize our new city court judge, Tamika Coverdale, is in the building. Y'all, let's give her. She's our Ketanji Brown locally. So again, County Legislator Tyree Woodson Samuels, I'm so happy to be here before you on this salubrious and frigid day, but it is warm in here. It's warm with love, and I'm happy we're getting to do this, right? The city of Mount Vernon is such a beautiful city, and it's beautiful because of our diversity. One interesting fact about Mount Vernon, well, two interesting facts is one, it's the only minority populated city above the Mason-Dixon line. That's black, that's brown, that's yellow, that's red, that's all the spectrums. And we have over 98 ethnicities in this small 4.4 square mile city. Think about that, right? That's such a unique fact. And so when Damaris, my good friend Damaris, who we all know is a constant idea generator, right? Damaris is always, those wheels are always spinning. And we're working on a few events, but when she reached out and said, hey, Ty, you know, I would love to put this together at the Mount Vernon Public Library for Puerto Rican Heritage Month, I thought, absolutely. You know, many hands make light work. And so I'm so happy to be here with her to support her idea. Unfortunately, I know Dr. Valdez could not make it because of COVID. You know, we're still all battling the pandemic. But we do have Mr. Davis here filling in, who I think will do, obviously, a wonderful job along with Damaris. So without further ado, I introduce to you Damaris Mone. Thank you so much. Give her a big round of applause, y'all. And we have some food over there, Damaris. What do we have? I'm half Caribbean, so we call it rice and peas and whatnot, but in the Puerto Rican and Hispanic community, you call it what?
We call it arroz con gandules.
Arroz?
Arroz con gandules.
Gandules, see? I'm learning, y'all.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Damaris. Give her a big round of applause, y'all.
Thank you very much for coming today. As mentioned, my name is Damaris Mone. I have been a resident of Mount Vernon for 20 years. I happen to be Puerto Rican, Puerto Rican descent. I was born in the South Bronx, but I've been living in Mount Vernon. It is the community that I have called home for 20 years, as I mentioned. It is actually the only community that I've ever lived so long in, and I have no intentions on leaving. So y'all are stuck with me, but anyway, so it became very clearly important as the Puerto Rican community has become to a shrinking population, particularly in New York City, and such. So a lot of Puerto Ricans have been leaving, going down south, going to Florida, Georgia, and other places. So I wanted to make sure that here in New York, that everybody knows that we're still here, okay? And so, and this T-shirt was made by, they did a movie, and it was a documentary on Hurricane Maria. And so, but also to remind everybody that we're still here. So today, the reason why we put this together was to introduce Puerto Rican heritage to the community as the African diaspora pertains to our community. And so one of the things that I wanted to do, I wanted to introduce you to Puerto Rican cuisine, Puerto Rican history, a little bit of knowledge. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to do a cooking demonstration to teach our community on how to make a meal, a one-pot meal on a hot plate, because a lot of our neighbors don't have access to cooking facilities. And so I wanted them to know that they could still make a really tasteful, healthy meal in one pot on a hot plate. And so I'm gonna show how to make arroz con gandules, which is rice and peas, as well as pollo guisado, which is a chicken stew, but obviously Puerto Rican style. And so I already have made some food this morning, so I already have some ready to go. So we're gonna be eating after the entertainment. And so I wanted to say, I wanted to introduce our cooking cuisine, as well as Timur Davis, who's going to be talking about Arturo Schomburg, who happens to be a scholar of Puerto Rican heritage. But for a lot of people don't know, and especially if you're in Harlem, you may not realize, you'll see the name, it just says Arthur Schomburg. And now that Harlem is actually becoming more and more gentrified, a lot of people may just think that he's a white Jewish guy and not really understand that he's actually Puerto Rican. Right? He was born in Puerto Rico. He happens to be of African descent as well, right, in Puerto Rican, but we're very mixed in Puerto Rico because of 500 years of everybody coming and staying and such. But I also I've been doing on Facebook a whole post of every day of Puerto Rican heritage and history and trying to share with everybody. And a lot of people don't know that in Puerto Rico, slavery lasted 125 years longer than it did in the United States. And so a lot of people are not really aware of Puerto Rican history. And we could call it whitewashing, we could call it whatever you want, but we've been around since the get-go, right? And even Puerto Ricans have fought in the Civil War. Puerto Ricans have fought during the American Revolution. We have been involved in every war that the United States has had. And so again, I just wanted to remind everybody, we're still here. So I'm gonna get started. And I also wanted to say, so we're not gonna get started with Timur yet. You wanna take that? Okay, well, double mic, okay. And we're gonna start with this, but I also wanted to let you know, so if you could please stay the whole 2 hours until at least 3 o'clock or so longer. We're also gonna have BombaYo, who's gonna be here to introduce Bomba. It's a song and dance. So they're gonna introduce what Bomba is. All right, so I'll definitely have him and he'll explain all of it. And real quick, I just wanted, I did this painting and I was inspired by doing this painting. I had just come back from Puerto Rico. And so the name of this painting is called Treasures We Lost in the Middle Passage, all right? And so I have, obviously we see there is this monster, right, that is enveloping what is the treasures. But I also included, this is the Taínos used to make these things in honor of their ancestors who had passed away, and they would keep them in their house. And so I also added a cowrie bead to remind everybody that we're also of African descent. And this is actually a piece of coral that I found in Puerto Rico, as well as this is sand from Fajardo, which is a pueblo in Puerto Rico. And so I wanted to bring all these elements together. And so this is called What We Lost in the Middle Passage. Treasures What We Lost in the Middle Passage. So I'm going to get started on demonstration as to how you can get started on a one pot. So please bear with me, because this is actually the first time I've ever done it in front of a whole class. I am not a professional cook, but I'm a professional mother. So I've been doing this for a very long time. But I also want to know, I'm going to show how to do it. We already do have some food ready, but that's going to be for after BombaYo has performed, and then we'll be able to sit, eat, relax, and have conversation and such. I do want to ask a quick question before we get started. Timur, do you have any time constraints? Can I continue another 10 minutes of doing this while? Okay. All right, great. So. So we're gonna get this started here. So actually so one of the first things I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make Arroz con Gandules. So a lot of people, and I really bought just the basics because I know a lot of our neighbors may not have tapas, right? So it's just to show you a plate works just as fine as a tapa, okay? A top, pardon me, right? So you could always cover your rice. And so one of the tricks that I've always tried to show people, especially when you are making rice, and I happen to make my arroz con gandules slightly different than a lot of other people. One primarily is I actually always wash. Can I bring my daughter to the stage for an assistance, please? So primarily what a lot of us, because we have time constraints and you don't necessarily have time to soak your beans overnight as we often do, you'll get canned beans. Can you go wash this out, please? But I always wash my beans, right? I always wash stuff because, and hold it, Si, you can go right in there. There's a sink right in there. And because a lot of our food all have preservatives and additives, right? So I always remove it. So clean it, wash your beans, make sure they're nice and good. And oftentimes, depending on if you don't have a blender, so a lot of Puerto Ricans, we make what's called a sofrito. So sofrito is made from a green pepper, onion, and garlic, which I have some garlic cubes here, right? As well as cilantro. So we blend it all together. And when you're in a hurry, it's great because it's good to go and you could throw it in. But if you don't have a blender and you can't, you could still cut up your pepper, cut up your onions real fine, cut up your cilantro real fine so that you have it, so that you could put it in, because that is what's gonna season your beans and your rice, and it's gonna make it real tasty. And I know my daughter is probably really trying to make sure that she washed them really well. Thank you very much. So I always start off with olive oil. And some people do it differently, but I in particularly prefer it this way. I like to saute my sofrito. Spoon. So I do about, depending on the size, I do about 2 teaspoons of sofrito that I'll add, and I'll begin to saute it. And then I'll add my beans so that they begin to saute with the juices so that it begins to really soak up into the beans. And of course I use garlic because we love garlic. There's not many vampires in our community, so. And it helps. Garlic is a really great way to season your food without having to use salt, right? And so if you really want your food tasty, and like I said, I'm not a professional chef, I'm just a professional mother, so I know how to wing it with what I need per size. As well as we use adobo. And I use some sazon. I think this is pretty much in every Puerto Rican household, right? I mean, this is like a staple to our all our foods. I mean, whatever you're seasoning, meat, chicken, fish, soups, rice, right? But it also adds the coloring. So if you want to make like just yellow rice without all the stuff, you could just add sazon. And one of the other things that I also find that it's also important is that you wash your rice, right? So I'm gonna do it real quick. But a trick to making rice is for every cup of rice, regardless of size, for 1 cup, you use 1 cup of water, right? So regardless of the size of the cup, it's the same size cup that you use for the rice that you will use for the water. So in this particular case, I'm going to use 3 because these are not a full-size cup. I'm going to rinse. Can I get a serving fork? Right behind you. Thank you. Yes. And obviously, if you're home, you're using your clean hands and over a sink and such. But a lot of this is that you just really just want to remove if there's any dirt, anything that may not be necessarily something that you necessarily want to use. And actually, I'm going to start this. This way, the water for the pollo guisado can get started. Now, my husband prefers pink Himalayan salt. I'm old-fashioned. I still like my old iodized salt. We argue about it all the time. He's like, "Where's the pink salt?" I'm like, "Bayaco, you use it over there." But for me, whether it's old school or the fact that they still use iodine and salt, and iodine's supposed to be very good for our health, so I kind of work with it. Something that a lot of people do not do, I do add a little bit of oregano to my arroz con gandules, just a slight, not a lot. I also add, and well, not everybody likes olives, but olives and olive juice actually add a particular flavor. And so you don't have to eat the olives, but know that the olive juice does add And for those that have heard about rice water and cleaning your hair with rice water, this is what that is. All right. And then I sauteed the beans. and all the good juices in it before I add water so that it all begins to soak up into the rice instead of just plain water being soaked up into the rice. I like the juices to begin coating all of the rice, and then I just mix it around. So a lot of our cultures, you know, particularly the Caribbean culture, I mean, in Puerto Rico, we call this Arroz with Gandules, but in Jamaica, they may call it rice and peas. I'm assuming down in the other Antilles Islands that they also call it rice and beans. Anybody from the Bahamas can tell me otherwise? Anybody from St. Croix, St. Martin, who may know? So as I said, for every cup of rice that we use, or whatever size, you're gonna match it with the same amount of water. Some people add a little more a little more water. It really depends on you. I don't like my rice to be mushy or very wet. I like my rice to be not dry either. That was 2, right? Yeah. All right. So we're gonna bring that to a boil. So while we wait for that to begin to boil, and then I'll have to, and what happens once it begins to boil, once the water gets down below the rice level, you lower the flame and you put the lid on it. And then you give it, you know, a good 20 minutes so that it can continue cooking, right? So now I'm gonna work on over here with the pollo guisado. And I gotta tell you, pollo guisado is one of the easiest things, especially if you're a working parent, because you don't have to sit there and chop up pieces, because eventually the stew is gonna break it down. Also, it's been recommended that you don't wash, because chicken can be dirty, so they say that it all gets cooked and cleaned when you cook it, and they advise that you don't clean it because it could get stuff all over the place. I don't know, but this is already cleaned. As a matter of fact, give me a quick second, I'll be right back. Hello? Hi, how are you? Nope, you are not in the way. Oh, thanks. I'm good. Nope. No, I don't. I'll be back for that. Okay. All right. It's a great event space because, you know, the sink's right there. So depending on the size of your family, you're gonna know. I like using dark meat because dark meat is a lot more flavorful than other cuts of meat. I also use my sofrito when it comes to seasoning my pollo guisado. Again, it's a chicken stew. Maybe not that much. But it'll all boil. Eventually the water will boil down, so you get a certain amount of thickness going on there. Same thing, I use sazon. We also use an onion, but my onions are already cut. So I use a whole onion. Yeah, sorry. Come back. Thought about that. It's all filtered thing. Just rinse this out for me, please. So you could, get regular carrots, clean them, chop them up. You could cut them in small parts. But again, as a working mom, often you have limited time. So what I loved about the little baby carrots that were already cleaned and cut, but you still want to make sure that you wash them, right? Because they still put preservatives on them to, to keep them fresh and everything else. I'm going to cut my potatoes. They're already washed. So while I'm doing this, I would like to introduce a special guest who snuck into the room. We have here the most wonderful, talented, brave, and the first Puerto Rican mayor in the county of Westchester. May I introduce the mayor of Tuckahoe, Omaira Andino. So thank you for joining us today. So I'm going to let these things cook while the rest of the event is going, so that this way, by the time we're done, this will be ready to eat. We do already have some that's already made and ready to go. So in the event that the hot plates don't cook as fast, right? Anybody have any questions as of right now? Yes.
Thank you so much for coming in here today and doing all of this. I am not Caribbean or Puerto Rican descent. However, we all, thank you. We are all part of the diaspora. And I think sometimes what happens is people, they think we don't have things in common. And rice, it brings us all together. Yes. Like my family from South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. Rice is an ingredient, and I love a good black-eyed pea. I love, so we have so much more in common.
Yes.
And I wanted my young nieces here, because also what happens sometimes, people forget about Afro-Latinos.
Yes.
They forget that. And I want them to always know that this is also a part of, I'm using two.
Now we can hear you. Great.
That the diaspora is so rich. We have more in common.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Yes. And Judge Coverdale, that is precisely why I wanted to host this event, to have this event, to introduce to a lot of our neighbors that may not be aware of it, right? I mean, unfortunately, the United States is notorious for not really doing well on its history of covering people of color, right? To explain our connections. And a lot of people are unaware that of the 12 million that were enslaved, that were brought here from Africa, only 5% came to the United States, leaving 95% of our enslaved going to the Caribbean and South America, right? And so that's 95%. And which is why the African diaspora is so very much connected in a lot of these countries, whether you're in the Caribbean, or Brazil, Ecuador, Cuba, Colombia, Guatemala. I mean, and each country has its own history and experience with the conquistadors that had come in, right? Different slaves from different parts of Africa were brought. But our history is part of the African diaspora. So I wanted to make sure that people were aware of what the connections are. And so, Judge, you notice the connections right away. And it is food, right? We do have that connection of food. So while this is going, I want to introduce There he is. He's getting ready. So our library director here at the city of in the city of Mount Vernon, happens to also be a Schomburg scholar. So the reason why I wanted to speak about Arturo Schomburg, as I had mentioned earlier, is because of the fact that a lot of people don't know that he's actually Puerto Rican. Right. And when you go into the center, you can't tell that he's Puerto Rican because there isn't a photo of the island. There is no mention whatsoever that Arturo Schomburg is Puerto Rican. And so a lot of people just know him as Arthur Schomburg, right? And they know the Schomburg Center in Harlem, but a lot of people don't know his history. And so I felt that it was very important that we had that discussion today, because I don't want to be erased, right? I mean, we're still here, right? So we're not going to be erased. And there's a lot to do with names. I mean, people have this assumption that you're supposed to have this Latino sounding name, or that we're supposed to have 5 names, right? And my name is Damaris Mone, Damaris Mone. I have a Greek first name, a French last name, but I'm 100% Puerto Rican. I mean, both of my parents were born in Puerto Rico. My grandparents were born in Puerto Rico. But clearly an ancestor came from France. And so the last name was passed down. And so you can't judge a person by their name. You can't make an assumption that even if they do have a Latino surname, do not assume that they speak Spanish, and do not assume that they're even part of the Latino culture, because they could be Filipino, right? Because Spain had conquered the Philippines for 400 years, so their names passed along, but they don't necessarily want to speak Spanish, and they're not considered Latino, right? In order to be considered Latino, you have to be from the Americas. And you have to have had part of that American experience in order for you to be Latino, because you're from Latin America. So, are we ready? All right, great. So while this is getting ready to go, we're going to get started on this conversation over here. I'm going to cover that. We'll check that out shortly, and we'll get back to this. All right. So I'm going to sit with you.
Thank you. Oh, you can hear me. Great.
Yes.
Just to let you know, the Canva PowerPoint will not pull up, but I have my notes. I have things here.
Okay.
I think it's important that when we're beginning to talk about not just the Latin American scholar, but when you're talking in terms of Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, we have to consider that he was a world-renowned scholar, and he actually, along with his colleagues during this particular time, during the Harlem Renaissance. And when we begin to look at what was taking place in the United States of America, we have 3 main...
Before you get started, can you introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, sure. I just was so wanting to get into Schomburg. My name is Tamor Davis. I am the current library director here at Mount Vernon Public Library. I worked at several different libraries throughout New Jersey and New York as library director in many different capacities. Started out as a library page and moved my way all the way up to library director. But one of the things that's interesting is that in reading, when I was 13 years old, I read J.A. Rogers' book, Jewel Augustus Rogers' book entitled The World's Greatest Men of Color. There's 3 volumes to this particular book. I read the 2nd volume and I came across the essay entitled The Black Sherlock Holmes of Black History, the Sherlock Holmes of Black History. Here you have Arthur Schomburg. Now, during this particular time in the late 90s, in like mid to late 90s, a lot of the scholars were coming in, like John Henry Clark was coming into Newark. You had Ivan Van Sertima, another well-renowned Latin American scholar, wrote a book entitled They Came Before Columbus. He talked about the Aztecs, the Olmecs, and different ethnic groups from out of South America into Central America. And then he also goes into different aspects of Caribbean history. In the dawn of 1492, January 3rd, at the end of the slave trade, and the beginning of Christopher Columbus entering into the Caribbean and what have you. So in understanding that particular history, I thought it was very important, and I found something I really liked when I began to start reading about Schomburg. And so when I would go to the library in Newark and different libraries throughout New Jersey and New York, I would always go and look at the annotated bibliographies. The annotated bibliography is a list of books. So if we was outside debating downtown Newark, and most of the high schools would debate and have fun and try to find information, so what I was always told to find out the list of books. So that was our cheat sheet. And so I would read a list of books about Malcolm X, a list of books if we was actually debating about Martin Luther King. I would get a list of different books about Martin Luther King in the annotated bibliographies, and I used to love doing that. In addition to looking through the annotated bibliographies, I don't know if anybody recall the African American Almanac.
Yeah.
The first book was published by Harry Pulaski. A lot of the resident scholars that was working on the encyclopedia would come into the Newark Public Library and actually start doing research. One person is John Brown, and he would always talk about the different methodologies of history, you have to understand not just African American history, but you have to understand Jewish history, Latin American history. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Clark would always say, because I would call him over the phone at 15 and say, well, the guy I like Schomburg, and so he would actually talk to me. He says, yeah, Schomburg. Yeah, Schomburg was my teacher. But not only did Schomburg teach Dr. John Henry Clark, Schomburg taught Kenneth B. Clark. Anybody familiar with the Brown versus Board of Education? That particular case? That whole case was actually won by the psychologist Kenneth B. Clark.
I'm going to keep cooking while you keep talking.
Right. And so with that case being won, a lot of people began to see the importance of it. Now, when you look at Harlem, Harlem was, if you would, a melting pot of different ethnicities. And a lot of people coming from the West Indies, from Africa, from Puerto Rico, all over the world, they were coming into Harlem. And Harlem was the place to go, because Harlem had style, and people liked the style that was taking place. You had, in 1915, you had Marcus Garvey in Harlem, and the person that introduced Marcus Garvey to Harlem was actually Hubert Henry Harrison. Hubert Henry Harrison was probably the foremost scholar during that particular time. He spoke about maybe 22 different languages, very erudite, very smart, used to work for the post office, and he would write for what's called the Negro World. And the Negro World had a lot of different black journalists writing for it. W.A. Domingo, you had T. Thomas Fortune, you had so many different people. Arthur Schomburg wrote for the Negro World. So many people wrote for the Negro World. And that was the world during that particular time. Not only did you have just the black journalists and black writers, we had what's called the Negro Tube movement, or the movement of the arts, where you had music during that particular time. You had, for example, Jacob Lawrence artwork, a lot of art during that time, especially during the Depression. So the WPA, Work Progress America, if I'm not mistaken, actually started funding a lot of different projects, art projects and music projects and so on and so forth, to be able to quell a great sense of a possibility of violence, because America was depressed on this particular time. So you had a lot of black scholars come out of Harlem. You had a lot of black artists come out of Harlem, a lot of black writers. And during this particular time, when you talk about black writers, when you deal with James Weldon Johnson, they actually owned their copyright. They actually owned their publishing. You know, unlike today, a lot of writers don't own their own copyright. They don't own their own publishing. And it was important for them to have total ownership, complete ownership of their works. At the same time, you had the social engineer, who was a librarian, who worked at the 135th Street branch. The 135th Street branch was very important because who would go to the branch? W.E.B. Du Bois would be there. Hubert Henry Harrison, Lawrence Reddick would be there. A lot of the leading scholars would actually get their foot in Harlem and have conversations, to have discussions, and talk about world affairs, so on and so forth. So the 135th Street branch, which is now part of the library again, it's always been a part of the New York Public Library, but now it's a part of the Schomburg Repository, which is part of the New York State Library. But at one point, it was called recently was called the County Cullen Library, but they actually changed it back, and now it's part of the Schomburg Center again. So when you look at Schomburg was birthed out and actually mentored by John E. Bruce. John E. Bruce was a writer. He wrote. He used to write under the name Bruce Grit. And he was part of the first Renaissance from out of Washington, if you will. And so when he came up, his thing was mentoring black men and being able to make sure they don't fall into that pit hole. So when you look at the history of John E. Bruce was a former slave. And actually his mother and father were slaves, so he ran away from slavery. So when he met Schomburg, Schomburg became a very important project of him. So not only did he mentor Schomburg, that's John Bruce, he also mentored Hubert Harrison. He also mentored T. Thomas Fortune. So and then it wasn't just it was a society. They were Masons. They was involved with the academy entitled the American Negro Academy that was actually started as far back as 1897. And so you had leading scholars. You had Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who was the second known African-American scholar that actually received this PhD in history from Harvard University. The first was Du Bois. But prior to Du Bois actually writing and actually getting his scholarship, the person that came before him was actually George Washington Williams. George Washington Williams wrote, still to this day, the most comprehensive history of Africans in America, bondsmen and bondswomen, and the plight of black people. And it was entitled, it covered from 1619 all the way up to the 1800s on that particular time. So you had a lot of great things taking place. So when Schomburg enters into New York in 1891, Schomburg is 17 years old. 17. So when he's here, he joined a couple of Latin American groups in hopes of dealing with the liberation struggle, because what was taking place in America and in the Caribbean is that Spain was controlling the Caribbean, the Guam, Filipino. So when we say the Spanish War or the Spanish-American War of 1898, it was more so a war with Cuba, it was a war with Guam, a war with the Philippines, a war with Puerto Rico. Okay, so it was a major war taking place, and the United States did not want Spain to control that region of the world no more. They wanted to be able to have full dominion and full control, and so that's why they waged war. I'm talking about deadly wars, where if you look at some of the photos and pictures, that's why I was trying to pull up, because I think Dr. Van Sertima would always say it's very important to understand history, and history should be told in images and what have you. I have those particular documents. I can send it to everybody once I get everything up, but unfortunately, I'm not able to get it up because when I have my password to my accounts are very time sensitive. So, I mean, very secretive, and it's hard to get in once I have to reset the code. So that's what I'm going through now. So there was this war in the Caribbean, and the war to control Puerto Rico, and in 1898, a war to control Guam, a war to control Filipinos, so it was a major war against Latin America. And America, one of the interests was being able to control that world. So there are some accounts that I read in terms of, if you read Eleanor Desverny's Sinette's book, she talks about how Schomburg was actually, in addition to placing books, because they would send books back to the Caribbean, but they were also arming some of the revolutionaries with weapons, and things so on and so forth, so they could fight against this major struggle against America and major struggle in terms of what was taking place in the Caribbean. And so Johnny Bruce actually began to start mentoring Schomburg and making sure that he gets the necessary studies he needs in America. In America, Schomburg always was interested in Black history, or the history of blacks all over the world. When in the 5th grade, one of his teachers had told him, he said, "Well, why are you concerned with blacks and Black history? Blacks don't have any history. You should be more concerned with, Anglo history, if you will, or Spanish history." So he didn't like that, and that really burnt him really, really bad. So throughout his whole entire life, he actually set out to make sure that the record was set straight in terms of the Africans, people of African descent, and their inclusion in the history, and a lot of people don't know that, or may not think that, if you look into the Caribbean, there's a dark hue. There's a dark hue because a lot of the people that were actually brought into the New World, if you will, or into the Americas, they were from predominantly the western part of America, of Africa. So a lot of them came from Dahomey. Now it's called Benin, from Nigeria. So a lot of those different places, and if you can even actually see some of the similarities in terms of Santeria. And if you're looking at Santeria, you're also looking at you're looking at Yoruba. You see what I'm saying? So there's a lot of great similarities if you look at the cooking, the Africanisms that's in the cooking. If you're looking at the dance, we got some good moves, right?
Let me briefly interrupt you. My apologies. I see you guys see me running around, so it looks like we kind of blew a fuse. So so hold up. So we're pulling a little power. But grateful that I did cook this morning, so we'll still have food. So so just bear with us. But I also did want to point out that we also have another special guest that has been able to join us. And so I'm not sure how your schedule is, but Congressman Bowman is here with us today. So if you've got to run, I don't know, would you like a few minutes? And I would love for you to come up. But I know all our elected officials have time constraints, and often they're running around from event to event. And so, absolutely. And then after Congressman, I will definitely want to have Mayor Andino come up and say something real quick. Oh, I'll tell you in a second. Hold on. Microphone, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely.
This is
Oh,
a very
okay.
nice setup. So I would
Well-
love to be a part of it. Looking real good with the pink and the bow tie.
Oh, I'm
what I'm
trying.
saying?
I'm trying.
Wakanda Forever just came out. We should talk about that, I think.
there you go.
Hey, everyone. How y'all doing? Really. What's up, Eric? What's up, man? Really an honor to be here. Just to say a few words, I'm going to listen to my brother continue to provide scholarship. But I just wanted to say something and make it very, very clear. My work in Congress is anti-colonial work. And my work in Congress is first and foremost focused on defeating Eurocentric colonialism, paternalism, imperialism, and white supremacy. So in order for us to do that, knowledge of self is going to be critically important, knowledge of history is going to be critically important, and unity is going to be critically important, no matter how much they try to divide us. This is of the utmost importance, and as many of you know, before running for Congress and winning a historic election in 2020, I worked in education for 20 years. So I worked with our children within a colonial system that didn't always teach them their history and knowledge of self. So the reason why I will always support events like this, and shout out to Damaris I don't know if my accent is proper. But shout out to you for putting this together. The reason why I will always support events like this is because we have to, number one, not let them divide us, understand the power of our unity, and understand the power of knowledge of self and knowledge of our history. So that is my work in Congress. So whenever you see me take a challenging vote, speak out against X, Y, or Z, I'm doing it specifically for that reason. Like if the legislation doesn't uplift black or brown people, I don't want nothing to do with it. And all of us in here have been, for our entire lives, fighting this fight. And so the reason why, people say, well, why nothing gets done in Congress? Because Eurocentric paternalism, colonialism controls Congress. And when you look at the capitalist system, it also controls Congress. So the answer to the question, why nothing gets done, that's the answer. The answer to how do things get done is to resist and challenge that system, but to also put a vision forward for what we want in our own communities. It's not an accident that if you're black or brown in Westchester County, you are less likely to have the resources you need for self-determination. That's not an accident. It is not an accident that you are more likely to suffer from upper respiratory illness because of environmental injustice. You are more likely to suffer from undignified housing and lack of housing, more likely to suffer from criminal justice entanglements. This is not an accident. This is by political design, and all of our people suffer from this. So it's just an honor and such a privilege to represent you in Congress. And the work is not about me, it's not about you, it's about all of us. So we can't just organize for the sake of an election season. Election is over right now. We got to organize today for the things we demand in our schools, in our city government, in our state government, and our federal government. Y'all have to hold us accountable. Y'all elected us, but you got to hold us accountable. And we got to know that y'all have our backs. If we know you have our backs, we're more likely to take the risks we need to take. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for allowing me to be on the flyer. That's very nice. And thank you, brother, for your scholarship and leadership. And I have jokingly said Wakanda Forever was out. If you haven't seen it, please go see it. I saw it Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That tells you what I think about the movie. But it was the first time in history that I've seen a movie with black and brown people fighting together against colonialism. I've never seen that before. And superheroes doing this. Right. And the main antagonist being a dark-skinned Mexican brother from Mexico with indigenous heritage. And getting pushback. The movie's getting pushback from Latino media that's used to putting forward non-brown Latinos, right? So it's just, it's exciting to be with you in this work. So God bless you. I'm going to hang out for a while.
Awesome.
I set my schedule around this.
I
got you.
Well, let people know where your connection to Puerto Rico is.
What is my connection to Puerto Rico? See, hold on, let me read something. I'll read this first before I give you an answer. But so I'll go back to just some organic, natural connections. My early years was spent in El Barrio in Spanish Harlem. I lived on 105th and 1st in East River Projects. And when you live in Spanish Harlem, like you and blacks and Latinos, y'all grow up is the same. Right. It's not even no difference, it's the same. So that's my roots. And since then I've learned about the Puerto Rican heritage connection to Taino and indigenous and native and African, etc. I've learned that since then. And my wife is Puerto Rican. Is that what you wanted me to say?
Yeah, of course.
So
we're
for me,
we're still here.
For me, anyone who's fighting for freedom, justice, and equality, and learning about Puerto Rico as a colony is crazy. Like, it's just like, what? How are they not recognized and represented properly in Congress with votes and all of that, right?
Right.
So I guess that's my connection.
Yeah.
But anyone,
Appreciate it.
regardless of ethnicity, culture, race, or background, if you're fighting against oppression, oppression in all its forms, the Irish was occupied by the UK in Northern Ireland.
Right. Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, we're against occupation, we're against oppression, we're against anti-humanity. That's right. And that's what we're against, regardless of what your background is. We're not about, corporate or capital or human or military or state power over people. That's the bottom line, regardless of what your background is. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for
for sure.
joining us.
There you go.
I'm gonna do one more quick parting. I'd also like to, I'm not sure if you've had been able to meet. Sorry, I would give, Brian, come back here. Back. Mayor Myra and Dina, if she would please briefly
I've
come.
never met her before.
So,
Do you work in the
He's like, do you work in the after, like, you know?
so as I had
Dropping
mentioned
some knowledge.
earlier today, Amira happens to be,
She's doing this right.
right. She's the first Puerto Rican mayor in county of Westchester County. She's the mayor of Tuckahoe. So talking about, right. So talking about, breaking barriers, right? I remember the first time you sent me, this is for you actually, you sent me a photo of the ceiling you broke. So explain to them in a little bit.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't hear it.
Yeah.
But I identify as an Afro-Latina.
Mhm.
And the reason why that's important to me is because there have been many opportunities that I've been passed over for just because of how I look.
That's right.
And I remember subscribing to Latina magazine when I was younger, but I never saw a cover with somebody who looked like me on it.
Right.
So I wrote to them. I think I was like 18 years old, and I wrote to them and said, why don't you have any women that aren't a shade darker than someone who looks white? And they wrote back and said, no, we do have some, and they pointed out some, but it wasn't true. So even within our own community, we're struggling with accepting each other.
Right.
And that's important for us to note, that it's not just other communities that are looking down on us, but sometimes we're looking down on ourselves. And so it's important for me. When I ran for office, I ran because I saw 5 white guys on a dais representing me and everybody else in my community who didn't have an understanding of where I came from, what was important to me, and that meant that other people were also experiencing this. So I decided to throw my hat in the ring, and I won my first election as village trustee by 5 votes. And so when I first met Damaris, she contacted me and asked me to speak on a panel with the other 2 female mayors in Westchester, Mayor Patterson, you guys may not know, and also the mayor in Peekskill. And the difference between where I live and where they live is that where I live, it's majority white people. So a lot of the news outlets came to me to say, how did you pull this off? How did you win in Tuckahoe? And if anybody knows Tuckahoe, Eastchester, it's predominantly white, Italian, with long histories, generational. And so for me, if I won, great. If I didn't, I still had a life. So it's easy to run and to fight when you don't worry about votes. I wasn't worried about votes. I was worried about the community that didn't have a voice in Tuckahoe. There's still a black and brown community there that just felt like they didn't have a voice. And so when I got up to the dais table when I won, a few people said to me, you really don't belong here, you won't be here for long. And I'd never been in politics. I'm not quite as spirited as our congressman is, but don't sleep on me, because I'm getting things done in a way that is drawing non-Latinos to
to be in agreement with the work that I'm doing. And I'm also showing them that they have a part to play in exactly what he's talking about. You know, it's you dropping some knowledge. I'm sitting there writing notes because we all, you know, we should always remember that we can still learn and we should still be growing at all times. But it's also really important to me to see the kids here, because any event that I go to and do, I want kids to see somebody who looks like me up on the dais. There are kids coming to Village Hall in Tuckahoe whose parents have lived there all their life. They said they never walked in the building because no one ever invited them. And so that's important. This is not about me. If I'm there for a couple more years, it's our kids who need to know, oh yeah, if she's up there, if you can't see it, then you can't be it. And so I want them to see it so that they know they can be it too. So.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it. So quick note, and we'll get to you, and then we got to get to BombaYo so that they can get started as well. So I didn't want to shortchange you, but we did kind of get started, on Puerto Rican time. We were a little late. But it's interesting enough. So I have friends that are Mexican American whether they're Irish American, Italian American, or other Latinos. They've always asked me, how come I don't identify as Afro-Latina? And I had said, because if I was to say that, I would end up offending my sisters who are darker than I am. So in Puerto Rico, there is an actual term to describe my skin color and my complexion. And so I'm called Habao. And Habao means pale skin, light eyes with African features, right? And so, so we could be all over the islands, and all over the islands you will find people that are pale skin, light eyes, but are clearly of African heritage. And so I tell people that yo soy Habao, but a lot of people don't really know what that term is, right? So it's easier for people that they just say, Afro-Latino, but every time I've wanted to say that, I've always felt that I'm gonna have somebody come at me like, your pale ass ain't no way, So I stick with Habao, or I just tell people Puerto Rican, because the reality is that Puerto Rico's a mixture. I mean, everybody came, they stayed, they mixed. It is what it is, over 500 years of history. So we're gonna get back to Timur, if you could close out. I know you have a lot more to share, because he had an extensive life. So if you wanna share a little bit more of what, with your studies of what you've done, and then we can go in, and then this way we can get BombaYo to come up, and then they can begin to do their presentation and showing how the African diaspora is also within our music and within our traditional cultures.
So, can you hear me? All right, great. So, one of the things is that Schomburg's mother was of dark hue, and his father was actually of German descent. That's where you get the last name, Schomburg. His mother actually pushed him in terms of his studies after the comment I made in terms of when he was in the 5th grade, he was told that blacks had no history. What Schomburg had done for the world, he produced one of the most leading American scholars in terms of John Henry Clark. He produced a leading psychologist, Kenneth B. Clark, who actually, as I may have mentioned before, he actually was the one that was supported the 1954 Brown versus Topeka case, and did a lot of great work. Schomburg, if you look at the Schomburg now, another person that was mentored by Schomburg, his name is Ernest Kaiser, born 1915 and died in 1990. He has an index called the Kaiser Index Guide. It's about 11,000 pages of information, index of periodicals, information, so on and so forth. Very expensive to get at this point now. And Kaiser would actually read maybe 200 books every quarter to make sure that he keep up with information and stuff like that, and he worked at the Schomburg Center. The Schomburg Center now is it's one of the many different information repositories, because when Schomburg was actually engaging in his work, there were colleagues that did work too. Henry P. Slaughter is another colleague. If you go to Clark, Atlanta, you have the Henry P. Slaughter collection. If you go down, there was other bibliophiles. If you go down to Howard University, You have the Springer Art and Modeling Library there, which is very extensive. And Dr. Dorothy Wesley Porter actually worked there for quite some time. And she actually passed away when she was 90 years old in 1995. So there's a lot of information about Black history. But it's not just Black history that's important, it's understanding the historiography of the history and how to interpret it, the philosophical spin. So if you was to read Earl Thorpe's book in terms of Black historian, it gives you a plethora, a good start to understanding the historians that actually wrote about the Black history. Even during at the Tuskegee Institute, you had Nathan Monroe Works, who was he used to work for Booker T. Washington as one of his researchers. Every year he would do an encyclopedia, a black encyclopedia, as far back as 1918, all the way up to maybe 1937. So it's a lot of information there that you can actually have access to. And I started my career because of Schomburg in terms of librarianship. And Clark, talking to Clark over the phone, he'd give me a little information. He's about in his late 80s. He see me as a young man, but he was giving me information and what books to read to get started in terms of librarianship. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you for everything that you do in the library, and I'm glad that you were inspired, because he is inspirational. I mean, the works that have been made, that are out there, we just need our kids to know that it exists, that, you know, these figures of people, these trailblazers, they exist. And so instead of us waiting, and someone had asked me earlier, why did I do this? I said, you know, I've been here for 20 years. I kept waiting for somebody else to do it. And then I was like, you know what? It's time. So instead of waiting for Superman or Boriqueña, so thank you, and thank you very much. I appreciate it. So I want to introduce the next segment of our event. It's a group called BombaYo. And they will explain, and they're going to go into the history. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Before we actually start any music, I want to, this is for the children that are here, for the young adults. I think that if they get it now, then we can say that the next 20 years, we're going to get where we need to be, right? As for us, we missed a lot of things here. I think that we missed out on a lot of stuff that I think that we still, we need to get there. Talk about Arturo Schomburg. I love that that we're here today along with the subject. And I also know that Arturo Schomburg, did not consider himself an Afro-Latino. He was an Afro-Boricua.
That's right. That's right.
So I'm gonna, let's talk about that. Because right now in Georgia, Kemp won because of the Latino votes. And what does that mean? That not all Latinos are representing blackness. Right? So we got to be careful to be put onto this one word that thinks that we are united when we are not.
Correct.
See, I'm going to be for real. We got to keep it real for our children to understand what is real. Because what is out there already is a big lie. It's a big lie. And Arturo Schomburg, when he came to New York, he was 17 years old. And the reason why he left the island, because it didn't happen here. It happened over there, where he was not able to learn about his own history. That's why he left. There was already a civil rights movement here in Harlem. So there's a lot of things that happen in Puerto Rico that are responsible for oppression. Next year will be the 150th anniversary of Abolition Day of slavery in Puerto Rico. 150 years. And up to 1873, when they were enslaved, that music was not allowed in the society because that music represented the black voice, the African roots. That was always oppressed. You want to know what bomba is? It's a cultural response to oppression. It ain't no dance troupe. It ain't no party. It's a reality of your own understanding when we talk about defining our story. This is what Arturo Schomburg was doing, defining his story. And we have to define ours. And when we talk about we are still here, when you see the bomba, that's why we are still here. Because of that bomba drum that represents the African roots. And then when we talk about that other instrument, the maraca, see, this maraca when you go to music school here in the United States, it's considered a minor percussion instrument. That's the education that our children get. But this, maraca, is a Taino word. And to our people, this is our major percussion. This is our voice. That's how we know we are still here. Not because someone says so, it's because of this right here, the bomba. In 1898, when the United States invaded Puerto Rico, we're still a colony. So let me tell you something. The only time I feel free is right there, is when I'm playing bomba. That's what bomba is. It's your inner voice. It is time to release it. Arroz con gandules. Right? You know, sofrito, it was first an African soup. And then it became our seasoning. The gandules, at a time when the drought was there was no, hard to get food, but that bean, that pigeon peas was available. So the gandules became a popular food for us because it was there, it was available, brought from Africa, not made in Puerto Rico. So this is how we define our story. You got to go back. Be careful what narrative you're on because you may miss a lot of things. Because that narrative that we're on here is by design. And it ain't yours. Yes, we pass, we get our degree, we make our money, and we think we're all that. And yet we don't know who we are. But our children need to know who they are. What's happening here, this is where you come from. This is your DNA. This is the voice of your ancestors. And this is your education. So let's do this now. Now we're going to give you some music. Right?
Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó. Que uno de tu hermoso amigo me comprometió.
Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó. Que uno de tu hermoso amigo me comprometió.
Me comprometió, me comprometió. Tú no sabes, amiga Lola, lo que me pasó. Me comprometió sin saber por qué a las 5 de la mañana y al amanecer. Me comprometió sin saber por qué a las 5 de la mañana y al amanecer.
But just, this is what, and please don't take it the wrong way. When we talk about like where we are with our, with our inner voice and understanding our roots. So, this music that we're doing right now is really, it's about community. It is bridging people together. And how do we do it? Through our dance. This is not really designed to be on a stage. This is not true. This is not a performance. We're not performing right now. When I get to do bomba, I'm it's about me. It's about my roots. It's about my people. It's about honoring my ancestors. That's what it truly is. It's honoring our ancestors. And it's not just a word. This is the action of that. This is how we do it, through our music. So don't just sit there and watch me. Get up and dance. Get up and dance. This is how we do it. And I don't know if you're aware that in this dance, it is about your own expression. And it's not a choreography, even though it may look like that. But that's because we understand our history, we know our roots, and we know that in this dance, the dancer is really the one that's composing. And no, that doesn't work with just anybody. Yet you gotta know your history. So here, Wilson Latigua, he's on the primo. He already knows that if I do this, he knows what's going on. anticipate. Let's see what's going to happen next, because the next thing after I honor the drum, now I'm dance. And so all he's doing, he's out serving right now, and he's waiting for me to make my move. That's what I'm talking about. That's the African black man. It's the consciousness. That's drum talk. That's real drum talk. It's not make-believe. And you all have a drum inside of you. We are all drum. That's my point. So when we hit the music, dance. Feel it. Make that connection. And this is the best time to do it now. After this, you never get to do it again. But if you try it, you really want to do it. Hey, BombaYo, Gandules.
That's you. That's you. Yeah. Please, come on up. Come on up. You too. Come on. Come on. This is for you. This is for you. Come on up here. We got one there, you know. Come on, come on, come on. This is what I'm talking about. We gotta have each other's back. That's right. We don't stand here alone. We do this together. Come on, you. Come on, you. You gotta represent. This is for tomorrow. This is the next generation. You gotta show yourself. Come on. Come on. I see you. Come on. Come on, let's do this. Come on. Don't be afraid. This is about you. This is about you. You got nothing to be afraid of. That's right. Now let's help the youth. Let's sing the song together. Yes. Right? Bole, bole. Biomba. Bole, bole, biomba. Bole, data. Bole, bole, biomba. Bole, biomba.
And that was, part of it. This is how you celebrate, right? Without food, without voice, without dance, because our dance is also our inner voice.
That's right.
Right? And you saw it right here, right? Right? Beautiful thing. I'm glad that we. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
This is so important, and you'll remember it in 20 years from now. You will.
That's right.
Right? I know I did. So thank you very much. This is BombaYo, and this is how we honor our ancestors with BombaYo. Thank you so much.
Before the family put the drums and stuff away,
Yes.
we must salute them. This is part of your soul.
Yes.
This is the soul of our people.
Yeah.
He's right about it.
And if you don't salute and recognize who you are, then no one else will.
Yes, that's right.
All right. They were in Pelham. I went all the way to Pelham to see the family.
Nice.
And this have to tell you that, Pelham is dominated by more European people.
Correct.
But they was out there.
Yes.
Everybody caught fire, caught spirit, as it is said. And like we did today, we dance. Never be ashamed of your spirit.
Yes. Yes.
Because that means you got a hole in your soul.
So I want to thank everybody, and I want to call in one of our also special guests, our City Councilwoman, Caitlin Moncardo Gleason. Please come join us before we sign out. And then we're going to do a little Q&A. So if you guys have any questions before we get started on eating and such.
Well, welcome everybody who's not from Mount Vernon and that came today to celebrate Puerto Rican Heritage Month weeks. The one thing I want to say is I want to take the time to thank Damaris for bringing this and being a part of this, and Decipher. Dr. Bob Baskerville, recognizing that this is an important part of our community. I also want to give a shout out to our director, because our director understands diversity more than anybody else, right? And we were just talking a couple weeks ago about different programs in the library. I'm a former library trustee, and we were talking about diversity and inclusion, right? Because that's really important. All cultures, everybody has to learn all cultures, not just one. This is something that Damaris, my friend, has been championing for a very long time. So Damaris came to the library at a time where she was struggling herself, but she was a blessing to us, okay? And she was able to take some of her wonderful experience and help the library raise money for the digital center that we're trying to open for the teens here at the Mount Vernon Public Library. So she's been an asset to the library for many years, and she's right. She waited a long time for somebody else to do it and then said, hey, I'll do it myself. And I love you for that, and I love that you chose here. Because Damaris is all over, okay? She's not just based in Mount Vernon, mostly in the Bronx. I mean, she lives here, but she's been all over, all the boroughs. She's helped every politician that there is, and she actually has taken those skills and put it into volunteerism, and I think that that's really important to recognize. So, she's a little bit of my hero. So I just want to thank everybody for being here, recognizing how important Puerto Ricans are here in the community. My whole family is the United Nations, so I totally understand the Hispanic culture more than most people. And you're absolutely right. Once that music hits, we're all up and dancing. Yeah. So coming from an Irish Catholic background is like, oh. And then being able to get up and dance yourself is really important, because music will make you remember every memory that you have in your life. You'll hear a song and say, oh, I remember back in 9th grade, or I remember my prom. So don't be afraid. Like what they said, don't be afraid to get up and express yourself, because sometimes people hold their emotions so close to their heart that dance is the only way to get it out. So don't be afraid when somebody says to you, get up and dance, because it might be your last dance, right? Well, we hope we have many more, and we have many more events like this. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to everybody. This was a great event today.
Great.
And
Thank you for joining us.
Well, please. My pleasure.
Thanks. And so I really do want to thank everybody for coming today and for participating. And you know, we were having a conversation of like, is anybody gonna come besides us? You know, we're like wondering, we're hoping, and I did get, you know, confirmations from my peeps outside of Mount Vernon that were like, oh my God, this is exciting, I'm gonna come, you know. And so I have Ricardo Pacheco came in from Queens, you know, to come check it out. Mayor Omaira Andino had come up from Tuckahoe. Efrain Gonzalez came up from the Bronx, right? And so I want to thank all of you guys. And you guys came up. You guys live in Brooklyn, right? The Bronx. Oh, you're also the Bronx. Okay. Well, you know, but that's my home, so you know. But okay. But it's funny, when we left the Bronx, I literally did a unilateral 3-mile commute. I mean, literally, we went from the Bronx. I'm 7 blocks from the border of the Bronx. So I remind people, I'm still very much the Bronx. A lot of my work is still in the Bronx. But Mount Vernon is my home, and so I bring what I've learned of my experience and my history and my professional experience to my community, because I want to share it. And because I truly do believe in diversity, and similar to what the city councilwoman said, I come from a very diverse family. I mean, from religion to race to culture. So to me, that's what I see in a community. That's what I want to see in my government. That's what I want to see in representation, is my family members. And so, like everybody else happened to mention, you want to see somebody who looks like you, who makes you feel like you're being represented. And so we need that. And so I wanted to make sure that people know that, I mean, Puerto Ricans may be leaving the Bronx, but we're very much now in Westchester County. All right? And we're definitely living here in the city of Mount Vernon. And so I wanted to bring a little bit of the culture, to introduce it to you, for those of you who may not have Puerto Rican friends or family members, or maybe you've never seen bomba, maybe you've never had Puerto Rican food, and maybe you didn't even know that Arturo Schomburg was Puerto Rican. You know, maybe you just thought he was just an African American man, or maybe you thought he's a white Jewish male, you know, because a lot of people judge us based on our names, right? So not all Latinos have Spanish surnames. Not all Latinos have 5 names. I don't have 5 names. My kids do, but I don't. My mother decided that she didn't like the whole Iralina Marta Perez Mone Butler kind of a thing. So I'm just Damaris Mone, and I really want to thank you so much for joining us today and for coming up. And please enjoy the food, and if you don't like it, somebody else cooked it. That's all I gotta say. Thank you.